Lord have mercy on my soul. I was getting ready to dive into chapter number 13 today of this book I've been reading in, I suppose it's audiobook style. I'm not here for any venues other than to share. Look at this though. What is going on here? My name is Natalie. I'm the good shepherd here on our small hobby farm, and I've got my little Chihuahua puppy out here right now chewing on a stick underneath me. The sheep have come in. Manfred's not happy to be bothered. The revival is now always in progress. Let me go ahead. Final Gifts by Maggie Callanan. This is a book on hospice workers' experiences with those who are dying. I find it quite fascinating that the last audiobook I read was called 1000 Gifts. And that book was all about the Eucharistio, the gratitude, the way of living for life's gratitudes and how it brings such peace and joy to our lives. And now here I am reading this Final Gifts book. These books are never just picked out by me. They kind of are books that I've already read and they appear in my life. I've been in my little barn dominium here for nearly 3 years and still haven't unpacked anything much of because I'm completely occupied by my flock here. They are high maintenance just like me. We do create the lives we live. Chapter 13, Nonverbal Communications. My actions speak for me. Dying people have ways of communicating other than words. Their behavior and actions are another way to show us what they're experiencing. It's common to see them reaching for someone or something unseen, smiling, waving, nodding, or weakly attempting to talk with someone invisible to others. They may pick at the bed linens as though trying to remove them, or try to get out of bed. When this happens, the person usually isn't frightened, but often has a look of wonder, recognition, joy, and sometimes puzzlement. Although these actions seem inappropriate and are often interpreted as confused behavior, they indicate the person is experiencing something. That something is part of nearing death awareness. This behavior is a nonverbal way of communicating experiences of dying, of showing that dying people aren't alone, that others who have died are meeting them. These reunions are not only with those with whom the dying have had long-term relationships or with people from the recent past, but can be with anyone. These gestures give us glimpses of whatever dimension exists beyond the life we know and show us how we might take comfort from these reunions and messages. Give me just one moment. Manfred, if you're going to behave like this, then you need to find another spot. Let's start today with Brad's story. Brad, bright, handsome, kind, and gentle by nature, Brad was an accomplished writer for a large advertising agency. Only 30, he was far too young to die of anything, but especially of a tragic and ravaging illness. Suffering with the sudden and unpredictable ailments that come with AIDS, Brad in many ways personified the early days of the epidemic. Brad and Adam, his partner of 6 years, shared a small, beautifully decorated townhouse in a city thousands of miles away from Brad's family home in Canada. Although Brad had pulled up stakes 10 years before, he remained in close touch with his parents and brother Lee, a commercial artist in Quebec. He called home every week and returned home each Christmas, always careful to conceal his sexual orientation and the degree of his closeness to Adam. They had no idea about our relationship or how sick Brad was, Adam told me. He struggled for years with how and when to tell his family he was gay. They're really wonderful, caring people, but he anguished about it. He was afraid the truth would break their hearts. When Brad first began to come down with the opportunistic infections often associated with AIDS, he minimized them to his parents during their weekly phone calls. But they became increasingly more concerned with each problem Brad reported. It seemed strange to me that he was sick so often, his father said later. He'd always been such a strapping, healthy young man. When his boss realized that Brad had AIDS, he fired him, claiming it was a necessary reduction in the staff. The firing cost Brad his income and his health insurance coverage. Can you imagine that, Brad said, with growing anger. Brad had been one of their best employees for 8 years. How's that for loyalty? Of course they denied any discrimination against him because of his illness or sexual orientation. We thought about hiring a lawyer to see what could be done, but frankly, we didn't have the money, and Brad was getting too sick to deal with it. We didn't want the notoriety anyway. Adam was a respected sports reporter for one of the city newspapers. Wasn't able to add Brad as a dependent on his health insurance or even use sick leave to care for him. All he could do was work as much overtime as possible to help pay the bills amid the daily grind of changing soiled sheets, bathing Brad, and giving his medicines. All right, listen up, everybody. I'm going to ask you to just pause again here because I'm trying to read a book here, and you're trying to knock the table over, June. You're getting ready to ram me, I know that. And you need to just settle down, little Chiquita banana. His medical bills are unbelievable, Adam said. The cost of just one of his medicines, AZT, is staggering. I begged him to level with his folks and seek their help, but he refused. When Christmas came and pneumonia kept Brad from returning home, the matter was taken out of his hands. Missing their younger son and concerned about his health, Brad's parents decided to surprise him with a visit. They drove from Canada and knocked on Brad's door only to receive a double-barreled shock. When they heard the word AIDS, there was a stunned silence for what seemed like an eternity, Adam said. Finally, Brad's father stood up and said to his wife, "I need some fresh air. Will you join me?" They left together. My heart was aching for Brad and his parents, he said. It must have been awful for them, and I knew Brad was afraid they would never come back. But 2 hours later, they returned, faces puffy from crying. It was so sad. They hugged us and said, "We'd like to stay and help if that's okay with both of you." I can't tell you how relieved I was. Brad's eyes filled with tears. The next few days were spent rearranging the den to make room for Brad's parents. His father called his business associate, explaining he'd be taking an indefinite leave of absence. His mother arranged for neighbors in Canada to watch their house and forward their mail. When Lee learned of his parents' plans, he offered to drive down the following weekend to bring additional clothing for his folks and some of his artwork for Brad's bedroom walls. But sometimes love and family support aren't enough. Brad's condition was changing rapidly. He no longer could manage the trip to his doctor's office. His physician encouraged Adam and Brad's parents to consider hospice home care, as Brad needed regular monitoring by professionals. They agreed. "Brad's so sick now that he can't be left alone at all," Adam said on my first visit. "I don't know what we would have done if his parents hadn't offered to stay, but we all need help and suggestions about taking care of him." Brad quickly became bedridden and couldn't care for himself at all. The AIDS virus was affecting his brain. Confused, unable to speak, and possibly deaf, he'd fix his big brown eyes intently on whoever was near him and follow that person with a look of urgency, as though he had something important he wanted to say. We always spoke to him, explaining everything we were doing, assuming he could hear and understand. He rarely reacted, but we had a strong sense that he was aware of everything and everyone around him. As the weeks and months passed, my admiration for Brad's parents grew. They never questioned or showed anger at this tragedy. They simply loved their son while gently and tirelessly providing for his every need. A mutual respect and love grew between them and Adam as they worked together caring for Brad. Hey, that's unacceptable behavior and I won't tolerate it. Do you hear me? She said no. She said no. Daisy, look at you limping. You terrible, sir. Becoming more debilitated, he stopped being able to swallow, but was receiving some fluids intravenously. We became concerned that these extra fluids might be prolonging his suffering and dying, rather than improving the quality of his life. I'm going to stop right there because this is where I'm at with my Chihuahua, Ruby, right now, who's 17 years old, 9 years of congestive heart failure, taking medicine 3 times a day all these years. Just this past week, my Chihuahua stopped eating her food and started going to eat the little puppy Starless food. Over several days, I continued to watch this behavior, observe, to determine what was going on. And what I'm able to understand from my dying dog, Ruby, is that her medicines are making her feel terrible, and she is associating her food with making her feel terrible. That's why she wants somebody else's food. So I've made the decision, beyond being the good shepherd. Ruby's been in my life 17 years. She's been in my life probably 14 of those years, or, 15. I stopped her heart medicines this week. Becoming more debilitated, he stopped being able to swallow, but was receiving some fluids intravenously. We became concerned that these extra fluids might be prolonging his suffering and dying, and that's how I feel with Ruby's medicine. Rather than improving the quality of his life. She has no quality of life, my Chihuahua, right now. She coughs all the time, every time. I mean, yeah, she still wags her tail, and she still eats twice a day and climbs up those puppy stairs onto my bed to sleep with me at night, but every step she takes is followed by these horrendous coughs now. 9 years. The doctor explained to Brad's parents that the IV fluids might delay his death by a few days, but that he was no longer really benefiting from them. He said the extra fluid might strain Brad's failing circulatory system and recommended they be discontinued. This was a very upsetting and difficult change for Adam and Brad's parents to even consider. Our need to nurture is intense. We survive, thrive, and grow. We comfort, celebrate, and reward ourselves and the people we care about with food and drink. For parents, this need is profound, regardless of the child's age. Providing nourishment for our children is an essential part of a parent's role. Withholding it feels like denying love and nurturing, the very core issues of parenting. So, despite the inability of dying people to tolerate or benefit from fluids and nourishment, families and friends agonize over the question of ending them. Brad's parents didn't want to stop the IVs. Adam and the doctor supported their decision. This is difficult enough for them, the doctor said. Continuing the IVs at a minimal rate won't make much difference to Brad. But if that helps his parents, then so be it. When I visited a few days later, Brad wouldn't look at me at all. Despite numerous attempts, I could not get his attention. His eyes were fixed, glaring at the IV bag hanging on the pole above his bed. Brad, I know this is hard for you, I said, holding his hand. I'll bet you're really sick of it all and would like it to be over. You look like you're angry at the IVs, but we have them running as slowly as possible, so as not to drag this out. But your parents don't want to stop the fluids because they love you so much. It's a decision that's too painful for them. As I finished speaking, Brad shifted his gaze from the IV bag to the wall opposite his bed, where Lee had hung a charcoal sketch several months before. He stared intently at that picture. I hadn't paid much attention to it before, but on this day, its symbolism was striking. Lee had drawn a study in shadows and light, showing an old stone bridge arched over a long, dark mountain tunnel, at the far end of which a brilliant white light gleamed. Many people report going through a passageway toward a wonderful bright light during near-death experiences. People who are dying slowly often have such occurrences as well. I returned to Brad's side and took his hand again, stroking it. Brad, if you're ready to go, it's okay, I said. I'll explain to Adam and your parents what I think you're trying to tell us. We gathered around his bed as I explained my interpretation of Brad's behavior. By looking at the picture with its image of passage, I thought perhaps he was attempting to tell us the time had come for his journey. Tearfully, they hugged and kissed him, giving him permission to go. We love you and will miss you, Brad, Adam said, but you have fought long enough, and we're ready for you to go whenever you need to. Brad closed his eyes and relaxed. During the next 2 days, Brad alternated between deep sleep and periods of being glassy-eyed, seeming to look through us at something we could not see. Lee was called to come home. Everyone was restless, wandering in and out of Brad's room, taking turns napping and sitting with him, touching and stroking him. They murmured soft reassurances. From deep sleep, he drifted into a deep coma, a brief coma, barely noticed. He then quietly died with the people he loved around him. At Brad's funeral, Lee said, "We were so close growing up we could almost read each other's minds. So it means a lot to me that he told us he was ready to die through my picture. It feels like I helped talk for him when he couldn't talk for himself anymore." Unable to speak, Brad still could communicate his awareness that death was near, and with help, his caregivers were able to understand his non-verbal message, giving him the permission he needed to go, and themselves the opportunity to prepare for his death. At one of our recent workshops, a middle-aged man told us his mother had died the previous year. A stroke had left her in a coma for several weeks, but moments before she died, she awoke, broke into a beautiful smile, and reached for something unseen. She put her arms together and looked down joyfully, as if cradling a baby. She died in that posture with a look of happiness on her face. There's a story behind this touching scene. The man explained that his mother's first baby had died just moments after birth. She went on to have 5 other children. All survived and grew into adulthood. We all knew Mother had lost a baby, but we never talked about it, he said. From the look on her face, I know she died holding that baby again. Knowing that a dying person may be reunited with someone they cared about reinforces our hope that love and important relationships may be eternal. Many families take great solace from thinking the person they love is not alone while dying and after death, but in fact may be in the presence of spiritual beings, perhaps the Almighty. Moving on to Alan. All through their marriage, Alan and Margaret had argued. When I first met them, they were arguing about the soup she'd made for his lunch. It's the homemade vegetable soup he loves, Margaret said. This morning, that's what he said he wanted. So I went to the store and spent all morning making it, but he took one taste now, says he doesn't want it, he's not hungry. Can you believe that? I explained how a diminishing appetite is part of many illnesses, especially the cancer that Alan had, and suggested that he probably wasn't interested in eating. Oh, well, she said, I didn't realize that. Then it's all right. I thought he was just trying to make my life difficult, she laughed and bent over the bed to give Alan a quick hug. I soon realized that arguing and physical contact were this couple's preferred methods of communication. Whenever Alan and Margaret were close enough to touch, they did, holding hands or hugging, even as I was examining Alan or asking about his symptoms. Often when I arrived, I'd find Margaret curled up in bed with Alan, reading to him or watching television with him. Even so, anything and everything was an occasion for an argument. They argued about whether or not Alan should get out of bed, whether he should take his medicines with ice cream or applesauce, which television programs they should watch. When I commented on this, Margaret said, "You know we've always been like this. I really love him and I know he loves me, but we both love to argue. It's never nasty and often not serious. Sometimes I think it's the way we stay close, although I guess that might seem a little strange to other people. I tried to stop once," she said. "After he got sick, I told him we'd do everything as he wanted from now on. But he said, listen, you don't have to be nice to me just because I'm dying. If you stop disagreeing with me, I'll think I'm dead already. Besides, I love you just the way you are." So I didn't change my ways. But now I let him win. Margaret was troubled that Alan had no belief in a life after death. "All the years we've been married, we've disagreed about this," she said. "I go to church every week, but he's never come with me. He says he knows that when he dies, that's the end, and that's all right with him. I've had a good life," he tells me. "I don't. I know you won't forget me, so I'll live on in your memories." "I don't think that's enough," Margaret said. "I wish he could believe the way I do, but he won't even discuss it." Sounds like my husband. Alan never did discuss religion, even to argue about it with his wife. He refused all offers of clergy and prayer and seemed to be at peace with himself. For the last few days of his life, Alan was in a coma, not talking or responding to anyone, not even to Margaret as she snuggled beside him. One morning, Alan's breathing changed while Margaret and I were with him. He opened his eyes and looked toward the far corner of the room. Smiling, as if recognizing someone, he sat up in bed and reached out his arms. He sat that way for a few minutes, then closed his eyes, slowly dropped his arms, lay back, and died. Margaret was awestruck. I hoped he'd just stop breathing and die easily, and he did. But this, she said, shaking her head, it was as if he saw someone and tried to reach for a hug. Who did he see? Could it have been Jesus? Have you ever seen this before? I told her about similar scenes I'd witnessed, and we talked about what Alan might have been seeing. Later, after the undertakers had removed Alan's body, Margaret and I were having a cup of tea when she suddenly laughed. "Well, I won that argument, didn't I?" she said. "I told him we'd meet again, and he said we couldn't because there wouldn't be anything after death. but he sure saw something we didn't, and he's gone somewhere else now. So he'll be waiting for me when I go, and I'll be able to say, I told you so. Do you think we can argue forever in heaven? This seeing, smiling at, or reaching for someone we cannot see is the nonverbal form of the messages we described in Chapter 7, being in the presence of someone not alive. People respond to or reach for someone or something beyond our perception. When this happens, as with Alan, the person often has a look of wonder, recognition, and joy. Let's move on to Karen. Several years after Alan's death, I heard from Karen, who as a nursing student had been observing the team meeting the day I described what had happened to Alan. She had moved but called to tell me about the events during her mother's recent death from cancer. Her family had managed at home until the last few days when her mother went into the hospital where she died 3 days later. Her death was expected, in fact. The family had been hoping she'd die soon, feeling that she had suffered enough. But they were shocked to learn that she fell out of bed and was found dead on the floor. You can imagine how he felt, Karen told me. My dad was crying and cursing himself for going home. He said she wouldn't have fallen if he'd been there. My sister and I were almost crazy with guilt. She's a nurse too, and of course we blamed ourselves for not keeping her at home. My brother was furious at the hospital staff. All of us were so distraught, the nurse asked if we wanted to see the chaplain, who turned out to be a young woman. I knew exactly what my dad was thinking. How can this young girl know anything about this? But she listened to us rant and rave, asked a few questions, and let us get out some of our pain and grief. After quite a long while, she said, "Do you think she could have been trying to go somewhere? Maybe to meet her maker?" My dad looked stunned. My brother was skeptical, but I immediately remembered your story about Alan, Karen said. I told them about it. The chaplain nodded and described other situations she'd seen, dying people opening their eyes, smiling, trying to reach for something or someone. My sister, who's been a nurse much longer than I have, recalled that she'd seen similar behavior too. What's so interesting is how differently we all felt then about Mother's having fallen. Now we don't dwell so much on her struggling to get out of bed. Instead, we remember that she was ready to die and that she believed, and we see her going home to her God. Just before they die, and usually without warning, some patients can muster an unusual strength. Unfortunately, some use that strength to try to get out of bed and subsequently fall. Afterward, the family feels a terrific amount of guilt and may blame the fall for causing the death. That was like me with Cinnamon the hen, who lived on my counter for 3 months, and I heard her one night and I found her on the kitchen floor, and I thought she died because she broke her back falling off the counter, and yet we did a necropsy on this chicken and she died from an excessively large thyroid. Her death was from iodine deficiency. And yet, had that necropsy not been done on my chicken, who wasn't my chicken, I was working with a veterinarian at the time with this chicken for a 4-H family. It's amazing. A frightened and tearful family member may say, "Dad just died. He was trying to get out of bed and fell to the floor. We've been with him all the time, but I just run down to the kitchen for coffee. I just feel awful. It's my fault. If I'd been there, this wouldn't have happened. How could this have happened anyway? He's been semi-conscious, barely responsive for the past 2 days. Didn't even have the strength to hold a glass of water. He was too weak to move it all by himself. How could he get over the bed rails? I don't understand it. How can I live with this?" Instead of assuming the worst, it's best to ask a few questions. What were the dying persons trying to do? Were they seeing someone or some place invisible to us? Were they trying to go there? Was someone that we couldn't hear calling them to come? We certainly don't want to suggest that it's all right for dying people to fall out of bed, but no one knows the reasons for this phenomenon of reaching out, and sometimes climbing out of bed in the last moments of life. The fall may not have caused the death. The person might have died at that time, whether she fell or not. The fall may have resulted from his response to something he was experiencing while dying. Family members should understand this and be vigilant, but it's cruel to blame themselves for something that wasn't their fault or due to their negligence because they didn't understand that dying people can exhibit a final burst of energy, and it's always worth considering the hidden meanings behind the fall, so as not to miss the important messages in this type of nonverbal communication. I can't believe right at the end of this chapter 13 how it correlates with Cinnamon the hen that I was just talking about. She arrived on our farm paralyzed, was going to be euthanized, and Dr. Tyser, the veterinarian here locally, called upon me, the Good Shepherd Natalie. And upon me arriving at the vet and seeing Cinnamon laying in her own wet filth, no life to her eyes, totally dying, I said, please let me bring her back to the farm. Totally paralyzed, she had no movement in her legs or feet or anything. I dove in with Cinnamon the hen and began one of the most beautiful journeys of my life, and I believe it was one of the most beautiful final gifts for Cinnamon the hen's life, to be here in heaven on earth as a little prerequisite to her final flying away into the real heaven.